A waiter walks up to Denzel Washington inside one of the most celebrated steakhouses in Atlanta and tells him he is not welcome. Not because of anything he said, not because of anything he did, because of what he was wearing. A faded navy jacket, worn jeans, scuffed sneakers. The owner took one look and decided that one of the most respected men in American cinema did not deserve a seat in his dining room. Denzel stood up, said nothing, and walked out. 10 minutes later, he came back. And what happened next left 43 people inside that restaurant completely unable to speak. There is a steakhouse in Buckhead, Atlanta, called Ridgemont & Sons. You have probably never heard of it. That is intentional. Tucked behind a row of manicured hedges off Peachtree Road, Ridgemont & Sons had no website, social media presence, no Yelp page. Reservations were extended by word of mouth only, passed between a certain class of people like a secret handshake. White tablecloths. Crystal water glasses filled before you even sat down. A wine list bound in dark leather that felt heavier than a hardcover novel. The average check ran $310 per person before wine, and nobody at those tables blinked at it. On a Wednesday afternoon in late October, during the quiet stretch between the lunch crowd and the early dinner reservations, 4 men walked through the front entrance without a reservation. One of them was in a charcoal blazer. 2 wore khakis and dress shirts. The 4th wore a faded navy windbreaker over a plain white t-shirt, dark jeans with a small fraying at the left knee, and a pair of Nike Air Max sneakers that had clearly logged a few hundred miles. No watch, no jewelry, nothing that announced wealth or fame. That 4th man was Denzel Washington. He had driven up from a morning visit at Grady Memorial Hospital, where he had spent 2 hours with the pediatric ward. Something he did quietly, without cameras, without press releases, 3 or 4 times a year when he was in Atlanta for work. He had come straight from the hospital without stopping to change. His friends had made the reservation plan a week earlier, and nobody had thought to mention a dress code, because in the year 2022, most people do not expect to be turned away from a restaurant for wearing sneakers. Denzel sat down first. He leaned back in the chair and looked out the tall windows at the afternoon light catching the tops of the hedgerow. He said something quiet to the man on his left and smiled. That particular smile, unhurried, warm, eyes crinkling at the corners, that anyone who has watched even one Denzel Washington interview would recognize immediately. It was supposed to be a simple lunch. 4 old friends, good food, maybe a glass of something worth drinking. The kind of afternoon that disappears from memory almost the moment it ends. Except something was about to interrupt it. A server approached the table. Young, maybe 26, hair neatly parted, pressed white shirt with a small gold name pin that read Travis. He was carrying 4 leather-bound menus against his chest, but he was not opening them. He stood at the edge of the table, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, jaw tight, eyes moving between Denzel and a point somewhere behind the group, over their shoulders, toward the back of the restaurant. Denzel noticed. He had spent 40 years studying people for a living. More than that, he had spent 67 years being a person who other people looked at before they decided something. He knew that look. "Hey," Denzel said. "Easy." And direct. Travis swallowed. "I'm well, sir, thank you." His voice was even, but his left hand was pressing the menus too hard against his chest. I apologize for this, sir. I have to let you know that our establishment has a dress standard for lunch and dinner service. Management has asked me to inform your party that we're unable to seat you today." The table went very quiet. Not the kind of quiet where people are surprised. The kind of quiet where people are deciding how to feel. Denzel looked at Travis for a long moment. Not with anger, with something closer to recognition. "The dress standard," Denzel said slowly. "Is that for all of us, or specifically for me?" Travis blinked. His face went through 3 different things in about 2 seconds. "Sir, management indicated the concern was." He stopped, started again. "Your jacket and shoes, sir. The standard is business casual at minimum." Denzel's friend Marcus, sitting to his right, leaned forward. "Business casual. We're trying to have lunch, not apply for a mortgage." Denzel raised one hand, barely. Just a small gesture, palm out. Marcus sat back. Denzel looked at Travis carefully. This kid had not written this policy. He had not chosen to deliver this message. The shame of it was sitting right on his face like a stain he could not wipe off. He was 26 years old, doing a job, and someone far above his pay grade had put him in an impossible position. "It's okay," Denzel said quietly. "I know this isn't coming from you. You handled it with as much grace as you could." He pushed the chair back and stood, straightened the faded jacket. "Come on, gentlemen, let's go." "You're just going to leave?" Marcus said. "We were asked to leave. So we're leaving." No volume in the voice. No performance. Just the flat, certain statement of a man who had already made a decision. He held the door for his friends, stepped out into the October afternoon, and let the door close softly behind him. In the parking lot, his friends were considerably less composed. "That man just turned away Denzel Washington," said Raymond, shaking his head slowly, "because of a jacket. That jacket probably costs more than his car payment." "Doesn't matter what it costs," Denzel said. He was leaning against the hood of the rental car, looking back at the entrance of Ridgemont and Sons. His hands were relaxed at his sides. His breathing was even. "You're not angry," Marcus observed. "It wasn't a question." "I'm something," Denzel said. "But angry isn't the most useful thing to be right now." He pulled out his phone and made a call, turned away slightly so his friends couldn't catch every word. 2 minutes, maybe less. When he turned back around, he had the expression of a man who has set something into motion and is completely at peace with how it's going to land. "Who was that?" Raymond asked. "I invited someone to lunch," Denzel said simply. Marcus looked at him. "Who?" Denzel just smiled, that unhurried smile again. "Somebody who eats here every month." To understand what happened next, you need to know who Clifton Beaumont was and what he had built and what he had become in the process of building it. Clifton was 54 years old. Silver-touched temples, always. A jawline that never softened. He wore bespoke suits on Tuesdays through Fridays and custom-pressed linen on Saturdays. He drove a Range Rover Sport. He owned a second property in Sea Island. His cufflinks had been a gift from a sitting senator. Everything about the way Clifton Beaumont moved through the world was designed to communicate one thing, cleanly and without ambiguity. "I have arrived." But the story that preceded that arrival was a different kind of story entirely. Clifton grew up in Vine City, one of Atlanta's oldest and most economically distressed neighborhoods, 4 miles southwest of where Ridgemont and Sons now stood. His father worked alternating shifts at a Ford parts warehouse in Hapeville. His mother took in laundry and alterations on weekends. There were 3 children and 1 bathroom, and a window in the back bedroom that rattled every time a truck went past on the expressway. Clifton knew, from a very young age, what it felt like to walk into a place and watch people revise their opinion of you in real time. The slight change in posture, the eyes that move from your face to your shoes and back to your face, making a calculation. The hostess who says, "Let me check on that," and then disappears for 4 minutes. He knew that feeling in his bones, the way you know a song you were raised on. He had sworn, in the specific and furious way that young men from difficult places swear things, that he would never feel it again. He opened Ridgemont and Sons at 40, a narrow space with 14 tables, and a menu he had spent 11 months developing with a James Beard-nominated chef he recruited from Charleston. Over the next 14 years, he had turned it into one of the most exclusive dining rooms in Atlanta, a client list that included federal judges, network executives, 2 former governors, and an ambassador. Ridgemont and Sons had become his monument, his proof. The place where the man who had grown up with the rattling window could sit at the head of the table and watch the powerful come to him. But somewhere in those 14 years, something had curdled. He did not just want to be successful, he wanted to be separate. Permanently and visibly separate from the version of himself that had pressed against the cold window on the expressway side of the house and watched other people's lives from a distance. And the mechanism of that separation was his dining room. No sign in the window, no policy listed anywhere, but the staff understood. If a guest arrived in clothing that did not signal a certain level of income and social position, they were turned away. Always politely, always with regret. A college professor in a cardigan. An elderly reverend in his Sunday clothes, slightly frayed. A young couple celebrating their first anniversary in the nicest outfits they owned, which were not quite nice enough. Clifton turned them all away. He told himself he was protecting the integrity of the establishment. He told himself it was a business decision, purely rational, nothing personal. He never allowed himself to notice that he was doing to strangers exactly what had been done to him when he was 17, and walked into a restaurant on Peachtree Street with his mother after her work, Christmas dinner, and a hostess, looked at both of them for a long 3 seconds, and then said, very pleasantly, that unfortunately they were fully booked. That had been a Tuesday in December. Tables had been visibly empty. Clifton had never spoken about that evening to anyone. Not to his wife, not to his children. He had filed it somewhere deep and locked the cabinet. He had built a restaurant on top of that locked cabinet. The man Denzel had called was Reginald Reg Harmon, 61, film producer for 33 years. He and Denzel had met on a set in Baltimore in 1989 and had maintained the kind of friendship that does not require regular contact to remain completely solid. Reg had been bringing clients and talent to Ridgemont and Sons twice a month for 6 years. He had personally referred 19 high-profile reservations to the restaurant. He was, in the language of hospitality, exactly the kind of guest an establishment like Ridgemont and Sons could not afford to lose. He arrived in 9 minutes, silver Mercedes S-Class, charcoal suit. The kind of man Clifton Beaumont had spent his entire career learning to attract and keep. "You got turned away from a restaurant," Reg said, standing in the parking lot with his hands in his pockets, and the particular expression of someone who has heard something they cannot quite process. "Dress code," Denzel said. "You're wearing a Nike windbreaker. Navy." They took issue with it. Reg looked at the restaurant entrance, then back at Denzel. "And you called me because?" "Because I thought you might want to be there when we go back in." Reg was quiet for a moment. Then, "Let's go have lunch." 5 people walked through the entrance of Ridgemont and Sons at 2:47 in the afternoon. Reg Harmon in the charcoal suit, Denzel's 3 friends in their blazers and khakis, and one man in a faded navy windbreaker and scuffed Nike sneakers. The dining room had filled somewhat. 38 guests across 17 tables, the low hum of afternoon conversation, soft jazz from somewhere in the ceiling. Travis saw them first. He was standing near the service station, and when he looked up and registered who had just walked back through the door, the color left his face so completely, and so fast it was almost alarming. Clifton Beaumont was at the host podium near the entrance, reviewing a reservation sheet. He looked up at the sound of the door. "Good afternoon, welcome to Ridgemont." He saw Reg. His expression warmed immediately, the practiced, genuine warmth of a restaurateur greeting a valued regular. He extended his hand. "Reg, good to see you." Then his eyes moved one step to the left. Same jacket, same jeans, same man. The warm expression didn't collapse all at once. It went through several things in the space of about 3 seconds: surprise, recognition, calculation, before it settled into something rigid. "Mr. Harmon," Clifton said, recovering. "Wonderful to have you. Table for 5? "Please," Reg said pleasantly. A pause that was approximately 2 seconds too long. "I do need to. I want to make you aware, Reg, that our dress standard hasn't changed. We had to address it with this gentleman's party earlier today, and I'm afraid—" "You're going to say it again," Reg said. "Not a question. Our standards apply consistently. Clifton." Reg's voice had not changed in pitch or volume, but something in it had settled, the way a courtroom goes quiet when a lawyer sets down a folder. "I want to be very careful here. Are you telling me you're going to refuse to seat Denzel Washington in your dining room for the 2nd time today because of his sneakers?" The restaurant had already begun to notice. Conversations at nearby tables had softened. Forks paused. A woman in her late 50s near the window had turned in her chair. "My policy applies equally to all." "Equally," said Reg, and then he turned and addressed the room. Not loudly. He did not need to be loud. "I want everyone here to know that I've been a regular at this restaurant for 6 years. And today the owner has refused twice to seat my friend, a man who spent this morning with sick children at Grady Memorial, drove straight here without changing, and was turned away because of what he was wearing." The room stirred. Phones appeared. Someone near the bar said something in a low voice to the person next to them. A man at the corner table, well-dressed, silver-haired, someone who looked like he had lunched at Ridgemont and Sons many times, set down his glass and said, clearly enough to carry, "Is that actually Denzel Washington?" They turned him away. A woman 2 tables over, twice apparently. The silver-haired man stood. "If that man can't eat here, I don't think I should be eating here either. Check, please." Sweat had appeared on Clifton's forehead. He was gripping the edge of the podium. Through all of it, the murmuring, the phones, the turned heads, Denzel had not raised his voice, had not pointed a finger, had not stepped forward. He stood slightly behind Rage, calm and still the way a man is calm when he is not performing calm, but actually is. Now he spoke. "Mr. Beaumont." His voice was quiet enough that the room had to lean in slightly to catch it. "I respect that this is your house. You built it. That's real, and it matters. A beat. But I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually think about it before you answer. If I weren't who I am, if I was just a regular man, 67 years old, dressed like this, walking in off the street, would you seat me?" Clifton opened his mouth. "I think we both know the answer," Denzel said, gently, not as an accusation, as a statement of something they both already understood. "And I think somewhere underneath all of this, all of what you've built here, everything this place means to you. I think you know that's not right." 43 people watching one man in a windbreaker say the truest thing anyone had said in that dining room in years. Clifton did not respond. He could not. He turned, walked through the kitchen door, and disappeared. Reg looked at Denzel. "What do you want to do?" Denzel pulled out a chair and sat down at the nearest empty table. "Give him a few minutes." "You want to wait? I didn't come back here to destroy him." He accepted a glass of water from a wide-eyed young server who had materialized from somewhere. Anybody can see that man is having a hard time. Hard times deserve a minute. They sat for 8 minutes. Denzel drank his water, talked with his friends, unhurried. Then he stood, walked to the kitchen door, and pushed it open. There was a hallway behind the kitchen that smelled of garlic and hot metal, and the particular sharp cold of a restaurant's walk-in cooler. At the end of it, a door with a frosted glass panel stood half open. Denzel knocked twice on the frame. Clifton Beaumont was sitting behind a desk that was covered in invoices and handwritten notes. His jacket was draped over the back of the chair. His head was in both hands. On the shelf above the desk there was a framed photograph, slightly dusty, of a much younger Clifton, standing in front of a narrow storefront with a paper sign in the window that read Ridgemont and Sons. "Opening soon." He was grinning in the photograph, unguarded, nothing performed about it. Denzel looked at the photograph for a moment, then he looked at the man behind the desk. "Mind if I sit?" Clifton looked up. His eyes were red at the edges, not the expression Denzel had expected. Not defiance or anger, something closer to exhaustion. The look of a person who has been carrying something too heavy for too long and just had it pulled off their back without warning. Denzel found a metal folding chair against the wall and set it across from the desk, maybe 5 feet between them. Through the walls came the muffled sounds of the kitchen, the clatter of a pan, a shouted order, the rhythmic percussion of a busy restaurant. "I'm not here to finish what happened out there," Denzel said. "I want to know what that was actually about, because that wasn't about a dress code." A long silence. And then Clifton talked. He talked about Vine City, about the window that rattled when trucks went by, about his mother taking in other people's alterations and never once complaining about it, about the hostess on Peachtree Street when he was 17, and the 3-second pause, and the tables that were visibly empty, and the drive home afterward when he had sat in the back seat and watched the city go by and made a decision so hard and so private that he had never spoken it to anyone. He talked about building Ridgemont and Sons, about the 14 years, about what the dress code was really for, which was not elegance or brand integrity but distance. Distance from the version of himself that had pressed his face against windows. Then he said, "You're not the first person I've turned away. There was a reverend, must have been 75, came in for his birthday dinner in a suit he'd probably owned for 20 years. I turned him away." He stopped. "I don't know that man's name. I never will." Denzel was quiet, just listening. The way his mother had listened when he was young and said something that didn't make complete sense yet, not trying to correct it, just letting it arrive. "I built this place," Clifton said, "so I'd never feel small again, and I ended up making other people feel exactly that. People who looked like where I came from." He looked up. "People who looked like you." The walk-in cooler kicked on somewhere behind the wall, a low mechanical hum. "I know what it is," Denzel said. "To feel like what you've built might not be enough. There were years I don't talk about much, when the career felt like it was slipping. When I'd go home after a day of auditions and sit with it. That fear that no matter how much you accomplish, you're still one bad day away from being the kid who doesn't belong in the room. He paused. That doesn't go away. You learn to carry it differently. But it doesn't go away. Clifton said nothing, but he was listening in a way that was different from listening to defend himself. What I want to ask you, Denzel said, is about that reverend, the one who came in for his birthday. What do you think he went home feeling that night? Clifton closed his eyes. That's the one that costs, Denzel said. Not what happened today, that reverend. He let the silence sit, didn't fill it. Then he stood, moved to the desk, put his hand on Clifton's shoulder, firm and steady, for just a moment. You built something real here. I've heard people talk about this restaurant for years. But a restaurant, at its core, what is it supposed to be? He glanced at the photograph on the shelf, the young man in front of the paper sign, grinning. It's supposed to be a place where people feel like they belong. That's it. That's the whole thing. He picked up the folding chair and set it back against the wall. I'm going to go finish my lunch. Come out when you're ready. Not for me, for you. He walked back down the hallway, through the kitchen, back into the dining room. What did you say to him? Marcus asked. The truth, Denzel said. That's usually enough. They ordered. The room had settled back into something close to its normal rhythm, though with an electric undercurrent that a Wednesday lunch at Ridgemont & Sons did not typically carry. About 14 minutes later, the kitchen door opened. Clifton Beaumont walked out, face washed, jacket back on, but the collar slightly less precise than it had been, hands not entirely steady at his sides. But standing straight, walking toward their table, the room quieted again. He stopped at the edge of the table, looked at Denzel directly. Mr. Washington, I owe you an apology. Not because of who you are, because of what I did. I turned you away from my restaurant, twice, based on how you were dressed. I told myself that was a business standard. It wasn't. It was something uglier than that, and I've known it for a long time. He paused and let the next words carry clearly. I've been doing that to people for years, and I am going to stop a beat. I'm also going to reach out to every member of my staff this week and rescind the dress policy. Formally, in writing. Denzel looked up at him, the real smile, the one with the eyes. That's what I needed to hear. Someone began clapping. Not loudly. The restrained, sincere applause of people who have witnessed something they did not expect to witness on a Wednesday in Atlanta. Travis, near the service station, pressed the back of his hand against his mouth. Clifton went into the kitchen and personally oversaw the preparation of their meal. Not as a transaction, because cooking was the only language he had for what he needed to say. The food arrived the way food arrives when someone who actually cares about it has made it. The bread was warm. The butter had been left to soften to exactly the right temperature. A small detail, the kind of detail that is invisible when it's done right and glaringly absent when it isn't. Denzel paid the full check, left Travis a tip that was, by any reasonable measure, startlingly generous. Travis looked at the receipt for a long moment. I'm sorry, Travis said, for what you were asked to, for how you were greeted. You were put in an impossible position by someone else's decision, Denzel said, and you handled it with as much dignity as the situation allowed. Remember that. That says something about who you are. They left as the Atlanta sun began its late afternoon drop behind the skyline, stretching long gold light across Peachtree Road. Denzel held the door for his friends, same as on the way in. What happened next was not planned by anyone. A 58-year-old retired schoolteacher named Beverly Odom had been sitting 3 tables from Denzel's group the entire time. She had come in for a quiet lunch alone, which she did on the first Wednesday of every month. She had watched everything from the beginning. She had heard Reg's statement to the room. She had heard Clifton's apology. She had seen Travis and the receipt. That evening she sat at her kitchen table in Decatur and typed a post on Facebook. She was not trying to go viral. She was trying to process what she had seen and find words for why it had moved her so much. She posted it at 8:17 p.m. By midnight it had been shared 400 times. By the following evening, 4,000. By Friday, a producer from a local Atlanta news station had called Beverly's daughter asking for contact information. By the following Monday, the story had crossed the state line. By Wednesday of the next week, it was on national morning television. But Beverly's post was not about Denzel Washington. Not really. The headline that kept appearing in the shares was this: the way he talked to that restaurant owner in private. Nobody was watching. He didn't have to be kind. He chose to be. That was the part that traveled. The weeks following were the hardest of Clifton Beaumont's professional life. Revenue dropped 41% in the first 3 weeks. Reservations were canceled without explanation, which is the particular cruelty of social consequences. Silence gives you nothing to argue against. He received letters, some angry. Some, oddly, were from people who said they had been turned away from Ridgemont and Sons in previous years and had never understood why, and were now putting language to something they had carried quietly. The Reverend's son found the restaurant's contact page online and left a message. He said his father had passed the previous spring. Said the birthday dinner that had been turned away was the last birthday dinner they had tried to plan together before his father's health declined. Said he didn't want an apology, just wanted Clifton to know. Clifton read that message 6 times. Then he called his attorney, not to defend himself, to begin the paperwork for what came next. 3 months later, Ridgemont and Sons did not close. It did something more difficult. It changed. Clifton gathered his entire staff on a Tuesday morning before service and told them the dress code was gone. Not modified, gone. He told them the truth about where it had come from and what it had cost, in human terms, over 14 years. Several staff members were quiet, in a way that said they had been waiting for this conversation for a long time. He launched what he called the Open Table Program. Every Sunday evening, a slow night historically, Ridgemont and Sons reserved a third of its tables for community organizations, shelters, halfway houses, church groups, mentorship programs, same menu, same chefs, same white tablecloths and crystal glasses. No simplified version, no backroom setup. The front room, the full experience. The first Sunday was awkward. Clifton wanted to retreat to his office. He didn't. He pulled out chairs, he poured water. He asked a 16-year-old kid from a youth mentorship program what he wanted to be when he grew up, and the kid said a chef. And Clifton said, "Come back next Sunday and I'll introduce you to mine." The kid came back. He kept coming back. By the 3rd month, he was spending 2 hours in the kitchen after Sunday service, learning knife work from the sous chef. His name was Jordan. He was the same age Clifton had been when the hostess on Peachtree Street had paused for 3 seconds and then lied about the empty tables. Clifton sponsored his culinary school application the following spring. Revenue recovered, then exceeded what it had been. Not because Ridgemont and Sons became famous for refusing Denzel Washington, but because it became known for what it had chosen to do after. New guests came, people who had always assumed a place like Ridgemont and Sons was not for people like them. They came because a sign appeared in the window, small, handwritten, framed in simple wood, that read, "Everyone who walks through this door belongs here." And below it, in smaller letters, a lesson learned the hard way. Travis left 2 years later and opened a small restaurant in Savannah, 11 tables, no dress code. One rule he told every new hire on their first day: every customer gets treated the same. Doesn't matter what they drove here or what they're wearing. Treat people like they matter, because they do. He told an interviewer later, "That day changed something in me permanently. Denzel could have destroyed that restaurant with one phone call to one person. He didn't. He sat in a back office with a man who had humiliated him twice, and he listened. He asked questions. He gave that man a path back to himself. That's a kind of power I've never seen before or since. Not the kind that tears down, the kind that builds." He paused. "The tip he left me, I kept the receipt. It's framed on the wall of my restaurant, not for the amount. Because I was the person who told him he wasn't welcome. And instead of punishing me for it, he treated me with respect. Every time I look at that frame, it reminds me what kind of person I want to be." Denzel never discussed the incident publicly. When a journalist raised it in an interview 2 years later, he said, "That's not a story about me. I was a man in old sneakers who wanted to have lunch with his friends. The real story is about the people who get treated that way every day and don't have anyone calling them back in. If it makes one person think twice before they decide what somebody deserves based on what they see, then it was worth something." Clifton Beaumont ran Ridgemont and Sons for 9 more years, kept the open table Sundays through renovations, through a difficult post-pandemic year, through a kitchen fire that shut them down for 6 weeks. He mentored Jordan through culinary school and hired him as junior sous chef the week he graduated. He spoke at 2 high schools a year about what it costs to confuse dignity with distance. He retired at 63, passing the restaurant to Naomi, a woman who had started as a prep cook through a workforce re-entry program and worked her way to general manager over 7 years. The sign in the window stayed. Naomi made sure of it. Clifton moved to a quieter house in Decatur with his wife Renata. They cooked at home most evenings now. Simple food, the kind he had grown up eating in Vine City: braised greens, cornbread, rice, and slow-cooked beans. The kind he had spent 20 years pretending was beneath the man he was trying to become. He told Renata once, on a Sunday evening with the kitchen warm and the window open to the sound of the neighborhood, that those home meals were the best food he had ever eaten. She laughed and told him it only took him 50 years to figure that out. He said she was probably right. I've thought about this story a lot since I first heard it, not because of the famous name. I keep coming back to it because of the reverend whose name we never learned, because of Travis, who was 26 years old and was put in an impossible position by a decision made above him, and had to stand there and deliver a message he didn't believe in, because of Beverly, who sat alone at her regular Wednesday table and watched something happen and felt compelled to put words to it because some things need to be named. Psychologists have a term for what Clifton Beaumont was doing, what most of us do, in smaller and larger ways, more often than we'd like to admit. It's called appearance-based discrimination, or, more specifically, a form of implicit bias that researchers at Stanford's Social Neuroscience Laboratory have documented extensively. The human brain makes status assessments within 100 milliseconds of visual contact. Clothing, shoes, grooming. These trigger automatic neural categorizations that happen before our conscious reasoning even engages. We make decisions about who deserves service, attention, and respect based on signals our brains are processing below the level of awareness. The disturbing part of the research is not that this happens. It's that it happens even in people who consciously believe they don't do it. Clifton believed he was running a business with standards. He was also running on a 40-year-old wound that he had never examined and never treated. The dress code was not a business policy. It was a scar with a door policy attached to it. What Denzel Washington did in that back office, sitting down, asking questions, listening without interrupting, naming the cost without flinching from it, is something therapists and conflict researchers call dignified confrontation. It's the opposite of humiliation. It holds someone accountable while refusing to take their humanity away. It is, according to research on restorative practices, significantly more likely to produce genuine behavioral change than public shaming or punitive consequences. It is also significantly harder to do. Most of us, in the position Denzel was in, would have chosen the easier path. The path where you make sure everyone knows what happened to you. The path where the consequences land on someone else and you get to be righteous about it. The harder path. The one where you walk into the back office and ask a real question and wait for a real answer. That's the one that actually changes things. Jordan is in a commercial kitchen in Atlanta right now learning to cook. The Reverend is gone, and that cannot be undone. The sign in the window at Ridgemont and Sons is still there. Some things cost more than they should have, and some people, when given the chance, become better than they were. That, I think, is the part worth holding on to. This story is a work of fiction inspired by Denzel Washington's well-documented reputation for quiet generosity, his years of unannounced hospital visits, and his consistent refusal to let his public image define his private conduct. The events depicted are fictional. The restaurant, characters, and specific incidents are invented. However, the central issue, appearance discrimination, and the psychological mechanisms behind it, is thoroughly documented in behavioral research and happens in restaurants, hospitals, stores, and offices across America every single day to people who don't have anyone waiting in the parking lot for them. If this story stayed with you, it's worth asking who in your own life might be on the receiving end of a 3-second pause that says, without a single word, that they don't belong, and whether you have the chance to open a door instead.